The envelope slid across the mahogany table with a sound that changed everything. Inside was a check for $500,000, and Richard Hastings was smiling like he just solved all his problems with one signature. What he didn't know was that the man sitting across from him, the one he was trying to buy off like some gold-digging nobody, controlled 47% of his entire empire. My name is Nathan Cross, and this is the story of how I watched my wife's family try to dismantle my life, while their entire financial future rested quietly in my hands. For 3 years, I had been married to Emma Hastings, the only daughter of one of Chicago's most influential real estate developers. And for those same 3 years, I allowed her family to believe I was nothing more than a mildly successful data analyst who had somehow convinced their prized daughter to marry beneath her social and financial standing. The reality was far more layered. The reality was that I owned enough shares in Hastings Development Corporation to remove Richard Hastings from his own boardroom with a single phone call. But I had stayed silent, observing, waiting, studying who these people truly were when they believed no one was watching and no one was keeping score. The dinner invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning. Emma slid her phone across the breakfast table, showing me a message from her mother, Victoria. "Mom wants us over for dinner this Friday," she said, her voice tight, the same tension that always surfaced whenever her parents entered the conversation. "Just the 4 of us. She says it's important." I knew what important meant in the Hastings family lexicon. It meant Richard had finally decided it was time to address the ongoing embarrassment of his daughter marrying a man who drove a 7-year-old Honda and rented a modest apartment in a neighborhood his landscapers wouldn't dare set foot in. "Should be interesting," I replied, keeping my tone even while already calculating just how interesting the evening might become. Emma placed her coffee down harder than necessary. "Nathan, please don't take this the wrong way, but maybe we shouldn't go. When my parents get this formal, it usually means they're planning something." She was right. In the 3 years since our wedding, Richard and Victoria had communicated their disapproval through 1,000 subtle slights. Victoria's constant mentions of Emma's ex-boyfriend Trevor, now the proud founder of an investment firm. Richard's habit of praising successful young men in his industry, always making sure I understood I wasn't one of them. The meticulously arranged family gatherings where I was seated at the children's table while Emma's cousins, credentialed, polished, and wealthy, discussed business with the adults. "We're going," I said calmly. "I want to hear what they have to say." What Emma didn't know, what no one knew except my attorney and financial advisors, was that Nathan Cross, the unremarkable data analyst, was also NC Holdings, the anonymous investment entity that had been quietly accumulating Hastings Development Corporation stock for the past 8 years. It began when I was 24. Freshly graduated from MIT with a degree in financial engineering and a modest inheritance from my grandfather. Most people would have bought a sports car or taken a luxury vacation. I bought stock, specifically stock in a struggling real estate firm run by a man named Richard Hastings, who was drowning in debt from overextended projects and catastrophic timing during the 2008 crash. I spent months analyzing his company before making my first purchase. The fundamentals were strong, the locations were prime, but the capital structure was a disaster. Richard needed money badly, and his investors were losing confidence. So I bought quietly, through layers of shell corporations that led nowhere. Within 3 years, I owned 15% of the company. By the time I met Emma at a charity auction 5 years ago, I owned 31%. By the time we married, that number had climbed to 42%. Today, I owned 47%. I was the single largest shareholder in Hastings Development Corporation. Richard Hastings worked for me. He just didn't know it yet. Meeting Emma had never been part of the plan. I attended that charity auction because a client was being honored. Emma was there because her mother had dragged her to another society event she didn't care about. We both ended up at the bar at the same time, each trying to escape painfully dull conversations. She made me laugh with a flawless impression of her mother's artificial social voice. I made her laugh by admitting I had no idea which fork was meant for the salad course. We talked for 3 uninterrupted hours. When she gave me her number, she added a warning. "Just so you know, my family is intense about money and status. If that's going to be an issue, we should probably end things now." I smiled and gave her the truest answer I could without exposing everything. "Money doesn't define people," I said. "Character does." 3 months later, I proposed. 6 months after that, we married in a small ceremony, despite Victoria's desperate attempts to transform it into a high society spectacle. Emma shut that down immediately, choosing a simple celebration with 50 people who actually mattered. Richard's toast barely disguised his disappointment that his only daughter had married so far beneath her potential. I smiled through it. knowing the man mocking my career could only afford that wedding because of capital injected by my investment firm. The game I was playing wasn't without risk. Every month, Emma worried about money in ways she didn't need to. Our apartment was comfortable, but she'd grown up in a mansion. Our vacations stayed domestic because I couldn't explain European getaways on a data analyst's salary. She adapted better than I expected. She never complained. She always insisted that being together mattered more than the lifestyle she'd left behind, but I could see the strain, especially during family gatherings, when Victoria would make pointed remarks about Emma's new normal. "Why do you let them treat you like this?" Emma once asked after a brutal Thanksgiving dinner, where Richard spent 20 minutes explaining real estate development to me, as if I didn't understand his business better than he ever had. "Because your father's opinion doesn't define me," I told her, "and because the most powerful people in any room are usually the ones nobody's paying attention to." If you've ever been underestimated by people who thought they were superior, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment about a time someone doubted you and paid for it, and smash that like button. Because this story is about to go completely off the rails. Trust me, you do not want to miss what happens when Richard finally discovers who's been pulling the strings behind his empire. Friday arrived with crisp autumn air, the kind that made Chicago feel almost civilized. Emma spent nearly an hour getting ready, cycling through 3 different outfits, before choosing one that struck the delicate balance between honoring her parents' rigid sense of formality and not appearing as though she were trying too hard to impress them. I stuck with khakis and a pressed button-down, the safe, predictable uniform of quiet mediocrity Richard had always assumed fit me best. The Hastings estate sprawled across 3 manicured acres in Highland Park, a monument to wealth so carefully curated it felt less like a home and more like a private museum. The driveway wound through perfectly trimmed gardens before delivering guests to a front entrance that belonged more in a European chateau than a suburban neighborhood. As we reached the door, Emma's fingers laced through mine. "Whatever they're planning," she murmured, "just remember, I chose you. Nothing they say changes that." Victoria answered the door herself, which was unusual. Normally, that responsibility fell to the housekeeper. "Emma, darling," she said, pulling her daughter into an embrace designed not to smudge makeup or wrinkle fabric. "Nathan." My name came out sharp and efficient, like a box being checked rather than a person being welcomed. The dining room table was set for 4, but the presentation suggested something far more ceremonial than a family meal. Crystal stemware, china that likely cost more than my monthly rent, enough silverware to intimidate anyone who hadn't grown up knowing exactly which fork corresponded to which course. Richard was already seated at the head of the table, dressed in a tailored suit despite being in his own home. That was Richard, always performing, always signaling status. "Nathan," he said, rising to shake my hand with the firm grip of a man asserting dominance. "Good of you to join us." As if attendance had been optional, as if this were a courtesy rather than a summons. The first course arrived, and conversation remained comfortably bland. Victoria asked Emma about her work at the nonprofit, where she ran community outreach programs. Richard spoke about a new development in the West Loop. I played my part flawlessly, asking just enough to seem interested, but never enough to suggest I actually understood the real estate market I quietly controlled. Then, as the plates from the main course were cleared, Richard reached beside his chair and produced a leather folder. The kind attorneys carry, the kind that signaled this was no longer social. "Nathan," he said, his voice shifting into the tone he likely used in boardrooms, "Victoria and I wanted to discuss something important with you. Something that directly affects Emma's future." Under the table, Emma's hand tightened around mine. She'd expected this, even if she didn't know precisely what form it would take. "We've been very concerned about Emma's well-being," Victoria added, gently blotting her lips with a napkin. "She sacrificed so much when she married you. Her lifestyle, her opportunities, her standing in society." I felt Emma tense beside me. "Mom, we've been over this." "Let us finish, sweetheart," Richard interrupted, lifting a hand. "We're not here to assign blame, we're here to address a problem." He opened the leather folder. Inside was a neat stack of documents. Resting on top was a check. Even from across the table I could tell the amount was significant. "Nathan," Richard continued, "I'm going to be straightforward because I value candor in business. You seem like a reasonably decent young man, but let's be honest about the situation." He paused deliberately. "You married above your station. That isn't meant as an insult, it's simply a statement of fact. Emma could have chosen anyone. She chose you, and we've done our best to accept that," Victoria said. "But we can't stand by while our daughter struggles financially out of misplaced pride, so we've devised a solution that works for everyone involved." Richard slid the leather folder toward me. Inside were annulment documents, neatly arranged. Clipped to the front was a check for $500,000. That's more money than you'd earn in a decade at your current position, Richard said, his voice steady with the confidence of a man who had never once been denied by someone he considered beneath him. Sign the papers, take the money, and walk away. You'll be better off than you were before you ever met Emma, and Emma can return to a life more suited to her upbringing. The silence that followed was total. Emma looked stunned, as though she'd been struck. Victoria focused on her manicure, clearly convinced the matter was already resolved. Richard wore a faint smile, the satisfied expression of a man who believed he'd solved a complicated problem with the precise application of money. I looked down at the check. $500,000. To Richard Hastings, it was pocket change. To the version of me he believed he was dealing with, it represented an entire future. And that was the exquisite irony of the moment. The man offering me $500,000 to abandon his daughter could only afford that gesture because of the billions I had quietly poured into his collapsing company over the last 8 years. That's a very generous offer, I said at last, keeping my tone even. Richard's smile widened. I knew you'd see reason. Just so I'm clear, I continued, lifting the check from the folder and holding it up to the light. You want me to give up my marriage to Emma in exchange for $500,000? It's an annulment, Victoria interjected. Much cleaner than a divorce, no blame, no mess, just a mutual acknowledgement that the marriage was a mistake from the beginning. Emma shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. This is insane, she snapped. You don't get to buy people. Sweetheart, sit down, Richard said calmly. The adults are talking. I'm 28 years old, Dad, Emma shot back. I am an adult, and my husband is sitting right here being offered money to leave me. How dare you? Richard didn't even glance at her. His eyes stayed locked on me, certain he already had the upper hand. Nathan understands how the world works, he said. Don't you, Nathan? Sometimes money is simply the most honest solution. I placed the check back on the table carefully, smoothing it flat against the linen. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. Before I respond, I said, I need to make a quick call, if you'll excuse me for just a moment. Nathan, what are you doing? Emma asked, clearly confused. Making sure everyone at this table understands the full picture, I replied. I dialed my attorney, Marcus Pennington. I knew he'd answer, no matter the hour. Marcus had been overseeing my interests for 8 years. He knew exactly what it meant when I called during a family dinner. Marcus, it's Nathan, I said. I'm having dinner with the Hastings family and something interesting has come up. Can you pull the current ownership structure for Hastings Development Corporation? Yes. Right now. I'll wait. Richard frowned, irritation creeping into his voice. What does your attorney have to do with any of this? Everything, I replied evenly. A moment later, Marcus returned to the line. I switched the phone to speaker and set it on the table. Marcus, I said, could you explain the current ownership structure of Hastings Development Corporation for everyone here? Marcus's voice filled the dining room. Calm, professional, unmistakably precise. Certainly. Hastings Development Corporation has 100 million shares outstanding. The largest shareholder is NC Holdings, which owns 47 million shares, representing 47% of the company. The second largest shareholder is Richard Hastings personally, with 18 million share, or 18%. The remaining 35% is distributed among various institutional and individual investors. Richard stared at the phone as if it had started speaking another language. What is this? He demanded. What does any of this have to do with Marcus? I cut in gently. Could you explain who owns NC Holdings? NC Holdings is wholly owned by Nathan Cross, Marcus replied. It was established 8 years ago using an inheritance and has served as the primary investment vehicle for Mr. Cross's portfolio. At today's closing price, the Hastings Development Corporation position is valued at approximately $10.8 billion. The silence that followed was nothing like before. This wasn't awkwardness, it wasn't shock. It was the sound of an entire reality collapsing and being rebuilt from the ground up. Emma's mouth hung open. Victoria had gone completely pale. Richard looked like he'd been physically struck. I don't understand, Richard finally whispered. I picked up the check and held it out toward him. This, I said calmly, is $500,000. You're offering me $500,000 to walk away from Emma. I let the words linger. Richard, I own 47% of your company. At current valuations, my stake is worth $10.8 billion. Do you understand what that means? It means, Marcus added over the speaker, that Mr. Cross is the single largest shareholder in Hastings Development Corporation. When aligned with minority shareholders who defer to his judgment, he effectively controls the vote. In practical terms, Nathan Cross could remove Richard Hastings as CEO with a simple majority vote at any board meeting. Richard's face flushed from white to deep red. "That's impossible," he muttered. "NC Holdings is— I thought it was—" He trailed off, stammering as the authority. "Thank you." He'd built his life on disintegrated in real time. "You thought it was an institutional investor," I finished for him. "A hedge fund, private equity, something faceless." I stepped closer. "You never asked questions because the money kept arriving whenever you needed it. 8 years ago, your company was buried in debt. Traditional lenders wouldn't touch you. They knew you'd overextended yourself. So when a mysterious investor started buying distressed shares and injecting capital into your projects, you didn't look too closely at where it came from." I stood and walked around the table until I was directly in front of him. "Every major project you've completed over the last 8 years was funded by me. The River North Tower, my capital. The Lakeshore development, mine. The suburban office parks that kept you afloat during the 2015 downturn, all my money." Victoria finally found her voice. "But you're a data analyst," she said weakly. "You live in that small apartment, you drive that awful car." "I am a data analyst," I said evenly. "I analyze financial data for clients who require specialized investment strategy." That part was never a lie. It just wasn't the entire truth. I glanced at Emma. "The apartment is modest because we chose modest. The car works perfectly fine. I've never felt the need to perform wealth for an audience." Emma was crying now, but not from hurt. From fury. "So you watched all of this," she said. "You watched them belittle you, treat you like nothing, knowing you could destroy them with one phone call?" "I could have," I admitted. "But I wanted to know who they really were. I wanted to see how far they'd go when they believed they held all the power." I looked back at Richard, still frozen in his chair. "Turns out," I said quietly, "pretty far." "Nathan," Richard began, his voice unsteady, "I didn't know. You have to understand, didn't know who you were." "Would it have mattered?" I asked quietly. "If I really were the man you believe me to be, would this offer have been any less offensive? Would trying to buy me away from your daughter suddenly be justified?" Victoria was crying now as well, mascara streaking down her carefully composed face. "We were only trying to protect Emma," she said weakly. "Protect her?" I let out a short laugh, devoid of humor. "You weren't protecting her. You were trying to control her. There's a difference." I pulled out my phone and opened my email. With a few taps, I sent a message I had drafted months ago, one I'd kept ready, waiting for the right moment. "I just emailed the board of directors of Hastings Development Corporation," I said calmly. "There will be an emergency meeting next Monday morning. The agenda is straightforward, a vote on the current CEO's position." Richard shot to his feet. "You can't do this," he snapped. "The board will back me. They know what I've built. They know what we've built," I corrected. "And they also know that 47% of the voting shares support new leadership. I've already spoken with the other major shareholders. When the vote happens Monday, you'll be removed as CEO. The board will appoint an interim executive team while a permanent replacement is selected." "This is my company," Richard shouted, panic fully replacing his polished confidence. "I built this from nothing." "No," I said quietly. "You built it to the edge of bankruptcy. I saved it. And I did so while you were treating me like I wasn't worth the air I breathed at your dinner table." I turned to Emma, who was staring at me as if she were seeing me for the first time. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner," I said. "I wanted to, so many times. But I needed to know whether your family would ever accept me for who I am, not for what I own." "Tonig." HT gave me that answer. "Nathan," she whispered, "why? Why let them humiliate you when you could have stopped it at any time?" "Because humiliation fades," I replied. "Character doesn't. Your parents showed me exactly who they are tonight. They tried to pay me to abandon the person I love most. They valued status over your happiness. I needed you to see that too." I picked up the check one final time and tore it cleanly in half. "I don't want your money, Richard. I never did. I wanted to belong to a family. I wanted to prove that I could love your daughter without caring about her last name or her inheritance. But you couldn't see that. All you ever saw was someone you believed was beneath you." Marcus's voice came through the phone again. "Nathan, should I proceed with the board notifications?" I looked at Richard, slumped in his chair, his face buried in his hands. I looked at Victoria, clutching her pearls as though they might shield her from reality. And finally, I looked at Emma, my wife, who deserved parents who didn't measure love in dollar signs. "Yes," I said, "proceed with everything. It's time for new leadership." The drive home was quiet for the first 10 minutes. Emma sat beside me in my terrible Honda, watching the city lights slide past the window. Finally, she spoke. "How long have you been planning this?" "I wasn't planning anything," I said honestly. I invested in your father's company years before I met you. It was simply a good opportunity. Meeting you, falling in love, that was pure chance. Beautiful chance, but chance all the same. You could have told me, she said softly. Any time in the last 3 years? I could have, I agreed. But would you have believed that I married you, not for your family or their influence? Would you have believed that I loved you for who you are, not what you represent? She was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, she admitted. Maybe not at first. I wanted you to know without any doubt that I chose you when I had nothing to gain. I wanted your family to reveal who they really were. Tonight, they did. What happens now, she asked. To my father's company, to my parents? The company will be fine, I said. Better than fine. I'll bring in a professional management team that actually understands how to run it. Your father will be offered a consulting role if he wants it, but with far less authority and compensation. And my parents? I exhaled slowly. That part is up to you, Emma. They're still your parents. I won't make you choose between them and me, I said, but I also won't pretend that what they did tonight was acceptable. Emma reached over and took my hand. I choose you, always, even when I thought you were just a data analyst with a Honda and modest dreams. Especially then, I said. Why especially then? Because that version of you loved me with no expectation of gain, she whispered. That version of you chose me when you thought I was just a non-profit worker with a judgmental family. That's real, Nathan. That's what counts. We pulled into our apartment complex, the modest building that had been home for 3 years. Tomorrow I could buy us a penthouse if we wanted, or even a house in Highland Park to rival Richard and Victoria's estate. But looking at Emma in the dim glow of the parking lot, I realized we didn't need any of that. We're keeping the apartment, I said suddenly. She smiled, the first genuine smile since dinner. Maybe we'll buy it instead of renting, I added. But I like our life. I like being normal. I like proving that happiness doesn't require a mansion or a luxury car, or impressing people who aren't worth impressing. What about the money? She asked softly. $10 billion isn't exactly pocket change. We're not ignoring it, I said. We're going to do something meaningful. You're going to expand your nonprofit. We'll fund community programs that actually help people. And maybe we'll start a scholarship fund for kids who want to study business but can't afford it. Kids like me? She asked gently. Exactly like you, I said. Talented, driven, but without the resources to prove it. That Monday, the board meeting unfolded exactly as I had anticipated. Richard was removed as CEO with 78% of the vote. He sat at the end of the conference table, diminished and humiliated, as the same board members who had spent years flattering him now voted to strip him of power. Victoria called Emma 17 times that day. Emma let every call go to voicemail. The next day, a certified letter arrived at our apartment. Inside was a handwritten note from Victoria. Emma, I don't expect you to forgive us. What we did was unforgivable, but I need you to know we thought we were protecting you. We thought Nathan was using you. We were wrong, so terribly wrong. Your father is devastated. Not about the company, though that hurts, but about losing you. About discovering that the son-in-law he dismissed is the man who saved everything he built. When you're ready, can we talk? No more envelopes, no more checks. Just a mother who wants to understand the man her daughter married. Emma read it twice, then said aloud, Do you think they mean it? I think they're scared, I said. And sometimes fear makes people honest in ways comfort never could. What would you do? She asked. I'd give them one chance, I said. But on our terms, in our apartment, no pretense. If they can accept us as we are, truly as we are, maybe there's hope. If not, at least we'll know. Emma picked up her phone and typed a reply. Dinner, our place, this Friday. No dress code, no expectations, just family. She showed me the message before sending. Too harsh? She asked. Perfect, I said. That Friday, Richard and Victoria arrived looking smaller somehow. Richard wore jeans and a sweater. Victoria chose slacks and minimal makeup. They'd left their armor at home. Nathan, Richard said when I answered the door, thank you for agreeing to see us. We gathered around our small dining table, eating pasta Emma had made. No servers, no crystal glasses, no performance, just 4 people trying to figure out if they could rebuild something broken. I owe you an apology, Richard said finally. Several, actually, for every dinner where I made you feel small, for every comment about your job, your car, or your background, for that check, for treating you like you were worth $500,000 when you were the man who saved my company and loved my daughter. I appreciate that, I said carefully. But the apology I need most is the one you give Emma. She's the one you tried to control. Her happiness mattered less to you than your social standing. Richard turned to his daughter, tears forming. Emma, I'm sorry. I couldn't see what you saw in Nathan. I'm sorry I made you feel like your choice wasn't enough. You found a man who loves you for who you are. No money, no name, nothing but you. That's what every father should want for his daughter. I almost destroyed it with my pride. Victoria reached across and took Emma's hand. I spent your life preparing you for a certain kind of life, a certain kind of marriage. When you chose differently, I felt rejected. But you weren't rejecting anything. You chose something real over something hollow. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. Emma was crying, but she didn't pull her hand away. Do you mean it? She asked. Because I can't relive another night like last Friday. We do, Richard said firmly, and we're prepared to prove it. Nathan, I'd like to take you to lunch this week. Just the two of us. I want to learn your business, philosophy, your investment strategy, everything I should have been asking about for the past 3 years instead of dismissing you. Emma nodded. Lunch sounds good, I said. But Richard, I need you to understand something. I didn't buy your company to control you or to hurt you. I did it because it was a sound investment. And I won't apologize for being good at something you didn't know I could do. I wouldn't expect you to, he said. I just hope you'll teach me, because apparently I've been running a company without understanding who really kept it alive. 3 months later, Hastings Development Corporation announced a major restructuring. Richard remained on the board as a senior advisor, but day-to-day operations were handled by a professional management team that fully revived the company. The stock price surged 40%. Emma's nonprofit received a $50 million grant from the Cross Family Foundation, which I'd established to fund community programs, scholarships, and initiatives that supported talented, driven kids without resources, kids like I had been. Richard and Victoria began coming to dinner at our apartment every other week. They learned to leave their expectations at the door, becoming Emma's parents, not Highland Park Society figures. Richard even joked about downsizing his car. If a billionaire could be happy in a Honda, he could survive without a Mercedes. The story of the hidden billionaire made business headlines briefly, but I declined most interviews. What happened at that table wasn't for Forbes or WSJ. It was personal, about family, about values, about what matters when wealth and status are stripped away. 6 months later, Emma and I sat on our balcony, watching the city lights. Do you ever regret it? She as kid. Letting them humiliate you when you could have just told the truth? Not once, I said. Now I know your parents love you more than they love pride. I know you chose me for me. And I know I don't need anyone's permission to be exactly who I am. Who are you? She asked, smiling. I'm Nathan Cross, data analyst, billionaire investor, your husband, and the guy who proved that the most powerful people at any table are usually the ones nobody notices. She kissed me. Below, the city sparkled like endless possibilities. Somewhere across town, Richard was probably working late, learning his own company from the ground up. The student he should have been all along. Victoria, likely planning their next dinner here, had left the armor at home. And here, in our modest apartment, Emma and I were rich in the only ways that mattered. We had each other, the truth. A future built on something more solid than money. The envelope didn't change everything. The $500,000 check didn't matter. What mattered was seeing who people really were and choosing how to respond. I chose love. I chose honesty. I chose to prove that being underestimated is sometimes the greatest advantage. Because when nobody expects you to win, victory tastes all the sweeter. My name is Nathan Cross. I'm the anonymous investor who saved my father-in-law's company while he tried to buy me off. And this is how I learned that the best revenge isn't destruction, it's living well. Richard tried to buy me for $500,000. What he didn't know, I'd already bought his respect. It took 3 years and one fateful dinner for him to realize it. If this story resonates, if you've ever been underestimated or dismissed, drop a comment, share your story, celebrate those who prove that success isn't about where you start or who knows your name. It's about who you are when no one is watching, and what you do when everyone doubts you. Subscribe for more stories of justice, redemption, and the quiet satisfaction of proving doubters wrong. Smash the like button if you believe character matters more than wealth, love matters more than status, and the best victories are the ones no one sees coming. Remember, the most dangerous person at any table is the one everyone ignores. While they underestimate you, you're busy becoming exactly who you need to be to change everything. Stay hungry, stay humble. Never let anyone make you feel small just because they can't see how big you really are.